Sandy and welcome to Minerva. Today we're going to do a sew along for Vogue pattern 1312. I'm really excited to get going on this pattern. It has lots of great pieces and interesting detail. It's done in 3 panels, so there's a top layer, a middle layer, and a bottom layer. I have a picture of the pattern. I'll put it up here. And we're using this really nice core linen from Minerva in this beautiful blue, right? It's going to be gorgeous. So one of the things that you want to do when you're working with a pattern like Vogue that has a fabric that doesn't stretch, because this is made out of a linen, so there isn't a lot of give in it, is you want to make a practice garment. You know, the pattern companies do a really great job of drafting a pattern and then sizing it up and sizing it down. But honestly, I don't know about you, I am not a size 12 fit model. I'm not even tall enough to be a size 12 fit model. So I have to make a practice garment before I actually cut into this really nice fabric, because I want the final product to fit me and I want it to fit well. So practice garments are called muslins, they're called toiles. It doesn't matter what you call them. Basically what you do is you find a fabric, and I used this muslin fabric, and all the information for the fabric and the patterns and everything we talk about will be available through links or listed down below. So that is, you don't have to keep copiously writing notes. So I used a muslin fabric, a lightweight muslin, which is similar in weight and drape to my fashion fabric. That's the first thing you want to do. And then the second thing is you only need to use just the very basics of the pattern. I put the sleeves, the front, no interfacings, no facings. I didn't put the zipper in, and I only did the top 2 layers because I wanted to see where they fall. And you want to keep track of marks that are on your tissue. So these round circles with the crosses in them, up here, these are the bust marks. And then there's also one for the waist. Typically there's one for the hips, but this is so full at the hips we don't need to worry about that too much unless your shape dictates that. So I made the muslin, I left the side open where the zipper is, and then put it on, pinned it, closed where the zipper is so you can see how it fits. The first thing you want to do is make sure you pin that side zip closed. And then take a look and see what's going on. So through here, it fit me really well. The waist was a little high, but I didn't have a problem with that because it is high-waisted, so I was okay with that. This neckline was way too big for me, and if you're young, it's not an issue, but as you get older, you kind of get smaller through here. So I took that in the front. I just took it in a little bit, and I took it a little bit in the back, and it fit much better. So I will go back and make those drafting changes to my tissue before I cut them out, because you can't make this kind of adjustment on your finished garment, right? So you don't want that. And also the sleeves were really long. Now I do shorten sleeves, but I had to shorten them like 2.5 inches. So I want to do that midway up the sleeve, not down here at the bottom. So that's another thing that you want to check prior to cutting out your fashion fabric. So now I know I can take and transfer these marks that I made. I also took the back in the same way as I did the front, shorten up the sleeves, and so when I go to cut my tissue in my fashion fabric, it will be the right size. So we're going to move forward and get all of our tissue pieces cut out and come back and start working on this really cute little top. Okay, we are ready to get started. Just a couple of things before we actually start constructing our garment. I want you to make sure that you take care of your fabric before you cut it out. In this case, I washed it on delicate and then I put it on air dry. You want to pre-treat your fabric the same way that you're going to treat it after you make the garment. So if you're going to heavy duty wash it and throw it in the dryer, then you need to do that before you cut all your pieces out and sew them together, just in case it shrinks a little bit, and you never know if it's going to shrink both ways or one way. This way you've taken care of it. I like to treat garments that I made very delicately. So that's the way that I wash them, and I wash them all the same. So just be consistent with that. The other thing you want to do is to gather all your supplies. So we have an iron-on interfacing here that we need to interface the neck edge with, give it a little body, a really good thread. You can use a universal needle with this. I checked my sewing machine, and you want to use, there's 2 layers here. You want to sew it the same way you're going to be sewing it with the garment. So in general, we're sewing 2 layers, so I wanted to make sure my stitch length was right. So this is a 2.4. That worked great. And then also I took it to my serger because I'm going to serge all the edges on this after I sew them. And the serger setting is perfect, so I know that that's all set. And then the last thing that I want to make sure is I have my label, and with Minerva you get this really beautiful label with the tag Minerva Makers, hashtag Minerva Makers on the back. So you want to make sure you have that also. In this garment, we are going to cover a lined bodice, which is fabulous because I'm not a big fan of facings. They tend to come out. This dress has a facing in it and it will pop out sometimes. So every time I wear it, I have to iron it. With a fully lined bodice, especially with the self fabric, it's the same fabric, it fits beautifully and there's no popping out. We're going to put in a side placket zipper, and if you've never done one of those, we're using an invisible zip, so we'll go through the process of putting in an invisible zip. But side placket zippers are great because you can have one solid piece in the front and one solid piece in the back, and you can also do it yourself. You don't have to like reach around and do it. So I don't know if any of you went to Catholic school when you were little. We used to have the jumpers that had those placket zips, and then they went out of fashion for a while. And I've sewn quite a few things with side zips, especially blouses and tops that are woven. It's a great place to put in a zipper. So the other thing is this linen is the same on both sides almost, right? It's really hard to distinguish between what's the right side and the wrong side. So once you choose, you want to be consistent, because there might be a sheen or a little bit of the weft, and if the light hits it the wrong way or the right way, you might be able to determine that two pieces aren't sewn together from the same side, right? So one of the things that I do when I cut my pieces out, the first thing I do is I stick a pin in the right side of every piece that I cut out. So just throw a pin in there so I know as soon as I pick it up that this is what I've chosen for the right side of my garment. So I'll be consistent throughout the whole process of sewing the dress, so when I'm finished it will all be the same. The other thing is, I don't know about you, but like I lie awake in bed thinking, oh, how's that dress gonna look? What am I gonna wear it with? You know, that kind of thing. And as I started thinking about the dress after I had made the muslin, I thought, you know, it's almost a floor length dress. I'm really short. I'm like 5'2", and it's got long sleeves and it's completely covered. And I thought that it might be a little bit too much fabric. I didn't want to be swallowed up by the dress, and I also wanted to highlight the details down below. So I ended up cutting like a long short sleeve, and it's going to end up coming down to here instead of the full length sleeve, so that shows a little bit more skin and it will lighten up the dress. It will also make it more wearable because now it will be multi-seasonal instead of just like fall and winter kind of thing. Now I'll be able to wear it in spring and maybe even into a cool summer evening or something like that. So that is simple. I just shortened the sleeve. I'll show you that when we get there. But yeah, so that's the beauty of constructing your own garments. You can determine your style and also how it's going to look on you. I mean, you certainly don't want to be swallowed up. And this pattern also comes sleeveless, which I think is a really great idea if you want to make it like out of a white linen or some kind of springy yellow or pink linen. It would be really, really sweet. So yes, there's lots of alternatives for this, but let's dive in. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to interface the bodice front and back. And we used an iron-on interface in the pattern. It says to hand stitch them. You used to have to hand stitch them, so they're a little behind the times. So you have an interfaced piece and then you have a bodice piece. And I have interfaced one piece of my bodice. This is the front. And you can see my interfacing went a little bit over the neck edge. Not a problem. When I serge that closed, it will be fine. I'm not too worried about that. The goal of the interfacing is to give this structure. So you can see this has structure. This is the corresponding piece. And see how light and wavy it is. So the interfacing just gives it a little bit of body so it's not like flopping around at your neck. So simple and easy. And what you want to do when you do the interfacing is lay a scrap piece of fabric on top of your ironing board cover. And then put your fabric down, and then put the interfacing, and that goes on the wrong side of your fabric, and then put another pressing cloth, or I use a scrap piece of fabric because I don't want the glue on my pressing cloth. And if you miss, like something like this is a little over the edge, this stuck to that cloth, right? And you don't want it sticking to your ironing board because it will get gummy and cause it to turn funny colors, and you really don't want it to stick to your iron because that would be just horrific. Then you get this stuck thing there and you can't iron and your iron doesn't glide. And so just an ounce of prevention for sure. And the other thing you want to do when you're doing interfacing is you don't want to iron the interfacing on. You want to take your iron and put it down and hold it, whatever the manufacturer says, 10 seconds usually, and then lift it up and move it to the next spot, and lift it up and move it to the next spot, especially if it's sandwiched between two pieces of fabric, because you can't see it. And if you start ironing it back and forth, you could move it and then you have to peel it off and then you have to cut new ones because you can't re-glue them on. So it's a nightmare. So just pick your iron up, put it down, pick it up, put it down, after it's all on, then if you feel like you need to iron it, you can run around and iron that on. So we've finished step 1 and step 2, and we haven't really done much. I mean, this is all prep work and it takes a while to get that prep work done, but honestly this dress goes up super fast for the amount of pieces. They're pretty much all straight lines except for inserting the sleeves, so not an issue. After we've applied our interfacing to the front and the back, it's time to construct the bodice. Now we want to make sure that we use the right version, because step 3 is version A, and we want to skip over version A because we're putting sleeves in this, but if you were doing a sleeveless version, you would stick to version A. So we're going to skip over to step number 10, where it says version B, and what it wants us to do is to stitch the bodice together. So we've done that. I've done that. Here's my side seam, my full side seam, and then this is the left, actually is inside out, right? So this is the left and this is left front, and this is where the zipper goes. So we only stitch down to the dot on the pattern, and then we're going to stitch the shoulder seams. And we're going to do the exact same thing to the lining piece, right? Just keep in mind that this is the reverse of the front, so you need to pay attention to which sides you leave open, because we're sewing them right sides together. So the inside is the reverse of the outside. So it says the left, but it actually is the right when you're looking at it. So what we're going to do, and again, we did the shoulder seams. Now you could press your seams open. You don't want both seams pressed the same way. I like to press my shoulder seams to the back. So since this piece with the lining is heavier, I pressed those to the back and I pressed these to the front. And then that way the seams will butt up together. So here is my front piece. Let's turn this inside right so you can see that. So this is the way it would actually go on. This is the left front and this side is open, and then I'm going to add my lining on top of that, right sides together. So here's the side with my opening, and I'm going to slide this over the other piece. So my pieces are right sides together. Sticky. There we go. And you know, we cut them out at the same time, so they should match perfectly. So that's step 10 and 11. And we're on to step 12. And what we're going to do is we're going to pin this whole neck edge. So now you can see why I pressed these going in the opposite direction. I'm going to start by lining up my shoulder seams, and because they're pressed in the opposite direction, you can actually just like wiggle them with your fingers and they fit right in. And I pin both of the seam allowances because I don't want a fold underneath that. Then I'm going to go to my other seam and do the same thing, and then that way I know that my shoulder seams are going to line up, which is really key. Even though it's the lining, you know, you want everything to be exactly where it should be. And then I'm just going to go around and pin my neck edge, and you can see my interfacing is a little bit further than the neck edge, but I'm lining the fabric edges up because that interfacing is going to get stitched off when I serge this edge, right? But I cut these at the same time, so if they don't fit perfectly, whew, that's on me, isn't it? Yep. Look at that. Beautiful. tighten this all the way around. It fits perfectly, and we're gonna go and stitch this on the machine. All right, I sewed the neck edge and I serged it just to take off some of that bulk. If you don't have an overlocker, don't worry about it. Just, you can trim it a little bit. I wouldn't trim it too much. But when I turn this inside right and I look at it, and then I need to fold my lining back inside. Well, that's what's going to happen, right? You can see how rumply that is, right? These are my shoulder seams. I mean, it isn't pressed, but even if you pressed it, you're trying to get fabric to curve. And there's no place for all of this stuff in here to go, right? It's all bunched up together. So what we're going to do is we're going to clip it a little bit, and then we're going to understitch it. And the understitching will help keep the lining in place and make it a much more finished edge. So because this is curved, I'm just going to take my scissors on the curved edge, and I'm going to clip through. Don't clip through that seam. I'm going to clip to that seam, and I have my hand underneath to make sure that I'm only clipping the seam allowance, because at this point you don't want to be clipping your fashion fabric, right? That would be awful. And you don't want to clip it so close that it's going to tear open. So I'm going all the way around the neck on the curved section, right? I'm just putting little snips in there. This is really the only time you want to cut into a seam allowance. You know, cutting into a seam allowance makes it less structurally sound. However, just that one little step, when I turn this back around, already you can see a huge difference in the neck edge just by clipping. That's the only thing we've done so far. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the iron, and I'm going to press the seam the way it's sewn. You always press the seam flat the way you sew it. And then I'm going to press the seam allowance. I'm going to press the seam allowance towards my lining, because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and stitch on the lining side, not on the front of the dress. On the lining side, I'm going to stitch the seam allowance to the lining. Basically, I'm making it stay away from the front of the dress, and I'm going to stitch it really close, like probably right about there. So I'm going to press, make sure that when you press, you want to make sure that you don't have like any crinkles or anything here, because when you go and sew that, you want this super flat, right? No bumps, no crinkles, right? So that's why we press first. Give it a good press, and then we're going to understitch, and then we'll move to the next step. Now, I want you to see that neckline. I haven't even top stitched this yet. Look at how gorgeous that is. Here's the thing, you don't need to top stitch it because it's absolutely beautiful. We lined up our corners, our edges here on the shoulders, they match up perfectly, and we clipped it, and then I went through and understitched, and you can see this is my lining, this is the front of my garment, and you can see that little tiny row of stitches there right near the edge. And when I go to press it, it just gives me an absolutely beautiful neckline, right? That's runway ready. And that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for a garment that is going to be beautiful and well made. Now, to me, it doesn't need top stitching. It would bring down the level of the garment, so I've decided not to top stitch it. But you certainly can go ahead. The top stitching will help if you're struggling a little bit here. But clipping and understitching, those two extra steps are absolutely necessary. So because we have now two pieces of fabric, right? We have the lining and the face of the front part of the fabric to deal with. We're going to baste the edges together, and what this will do is help us when we go to put our sleeves in and put the skirt on. So essentially, we're just going to take the armholes, and inside the seam allowance, you don't want to do it at 5/8 of an inch. You want to do it at like a 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch. You want to baste these seams together. And same thing as we did with the neck edge. You want to butt these edge seams, make sure they line up, and butt them together. But we're just pinning this around, and we're going to baste each of the sleeve holes, because that will make inserting the sleeves construction much easier. We're also going to go around the bottom and baste all the way across the bottom here. So you want to line up your side seams. Right, all the way around the bottom, and then they have you also baste this zipper opening. So we will do that. We're going to use their construction method. So the highest setting, stitch setting on your machine, it could be a 5, it could be a 6, and within the seam allowance, because if you sew it on the seam allowance, you may see it if you miss a little bit, if you're off, or it may be way outside the seam allowance, then you're going to have to unpick it, which would be, unnecessary. We don't need to do that. You can baste it by hand, which is what they show in the machine with a needle and long basting threads. It's what they show in the instructions, long needle and a basting thread. What I'm going to do is turn my machine up to the longest stitch setting and just baste it at about 3/8 of an inch, and then that way I'll be sure that it's inside the seam allowance. And when I come back, we'll have one whole entire unit to put together. So the next thing we're going to tackle is sleeves, and I want to just talk a little bit about them before we move forward with them. I shortened my sleeve. I made a 3/4 length sleeve because I decided that it would be less fabric on my body. I'm short, and there's a lot of fabric because there's a lot of volume in the bottom of this skirt. So I did a long short sleeve, I guess you would call it that. So I literally just folded this bottom piece up and pinned it. But one of the things you want to think about is if you look at the bottom of the sleeve pattern, you can see there's that little angle there at the bottom, and that's where the hemline is. And it's like that, so when you fold it back up, it's as wide as the sleeve. So the sleeve gets narrow as it gets to the bottom, right? So if this piece was still narrow when you went to hem it, your sleeve would bunch because you wouldn't have the same run around the hem edge as you had where you were hemming it. So you want to keep that in mind if you're shortening or changing the length of your sleeve, to add that little angle at the bottom. So when I hem this, my hem will be the same as the width of my sleeve going down. So it goes down and then it comes out again. So those are important things to think about. Also, don't forget to mark your sleeves. This top center mark on your pattern is very, very important. That matches up with your shoulder seam, and sleeves are not always symmetrical, so you can't assume that the center of the sleeve is going to fit on your shoulder seam. So you need to mark that, some chalk or a pin, and then also you need to mark these notches at the side. The double notches go to the back. It's a universal notching, so you want to make sure that at the very least you mark the double notches, because that way you'll know which sleeve goes on correctly. You don't want to mix up your sleeves. The fronts are usually cut a little bit more shallow than the backs because we need more room in the back of our sleeve to move our arm. So I'm going to baste everything on my top and get that going, and I'm going to just stitch the side seams. I'm going to fold my sleeves right sides together and stitch up the side seam, and then we'll be back to put our top together. Woo, put on sleeves. Yep. All right, here is our top. It's all basted together. The armholes are basted, so there's less flopping around, and it also is going to make our lives easier when we go to put it together, because now this is one unit, right? So when we attach the middle tier skirt, we have one unit we're dealing with and not 3 or 4 layers of fabric, which becomes a real issue. All right, so we're going to need that in a sec. We sewed up the side seam of our sleeve. Oop. All right, let's go this way. There we go. We sewed up the side seam of our sleeve. So now we have a sleeve tube, and I also serged around the bottom edge, and they want you to hem it before you put it on, which makes a lot of sense because then you don't have this big heavy garment like hanging off your machine. So I just folded where we have that little groove, I just folded this up, pressed it, and then stitched it. And I stitch from the inside because I can see what I'm doing, and as long as your stitches are balanced on your machine, your bobbin stitch will look just as nice as your top stitch. It's perfectly fine for a hem, especially if your thread matches as beautifully as this does. So the sleeve is ready to go. So a couple of things that we want to consider. It's a set-in sleeve. They skipped a step. To set in a sleeve and get a really nice sleeve cap, you want to do 2 rows of basting stitches. Again, it's the largest stitch on your machine, and you also want to make sure that you leave tails on either end, right? You want to leave thread tails. This is the one time you're allowed to leave thread tails because they drive me crazy. But we need to gather this up a little bit to fit it into the armhole. So here is my top. All right, this is the front, and I want to make sure that I get the sleeves on the right way. So I'm going to put my sleeves on right sides out because this is the right side. This way I know that I'm getting the right sleeve, the correct sleeve on the correct side. So I'm going to look for my notches, and I don't have notches on that one. Okay, so I'm going to look for my notches. I have my center notch here, my chalk notch, and then I have my double hash notch here. Oh, that reminds me, the threads that you're going to sew on here, you're going to sew them between these notches, and you want to sew one inside the seam allowance and one outside the seam allowance. So one for a 5/8 inch seam allowance, you sew one at 3/8 and then one at 7/8. This 7/8 one you're going to have to take out afterwards, but you want to be able to have your real stitches go right in between. So here's my double notch, so that goes to the back. So I know this is the back of this sleeve, right? So the back of this sleeve is going to go on this side of my garment, right? Because now the back of the sleeve is facing the back of the garment, and then that means this one will go on this side. And it's important for me to have this laid out in front of me, this way I don't mix them up. So we're going to start with this one. These are both right sides together. I want the pins to be on the top, and I want the sleeve to be on the bottom, because our sewing machine, the feed dogs on the sewing machine, will help bring in some of the ease, because this sleeve cap, this sleeve opening, is bigger than this armhole opening, and that's what gives us a really nice sleeve cap. So we need to fit that in without getting any little crinkles or crumples. So what I want to do is I want to match this notch that I have here, this chalk notch, to this shoulder seam, and I want to put them right sides together. So I need to kind of flip my sleeve over a little bit, and I just pin that there for the time being, because I want, like I said, I want my pins on the garment, so I need to turn my garment inside out. And then now my sleeve is attached. I just need to redo that pin. So that marks up with my shoulder seam. And then what I do is I go down to the bottom and I match my underarm seam with my side seam. I pin that. And then this first section on either side of the underarm, there's no ease in that. That's why you only do the threads from the notch up. So we're going to pin that on a 1-to-1 because we don't want any gatherings under our arms. We don't need any extra fabric under there. So I'm going to go to either side of the side seam and pin up my sleeve. All right, so now what I have is this piece that's too big for this opening, and this piece over here that's too big for this opening. But I've balanced it so I don't have to worry about having too much in the front or too much in the back. So the next step is to pull like the 2 basting threads or whatever the 2 threads on that side are facing you. You want to just pull them a little bit, just a little bit. I don't think you need much. This garment doesn't have puffy sleeves, but we just want to fit them in to the space, right? And now I'm going to pin it from the side. So this takes a little coercion because we don't want any crinkles on here. We just want it to be eased in. And like I said, the feed dogs will help on that. You kind of have to use your fingers and smooth it out a little bit. Make sure that you don't have any crinkles in there. If you're at all nervous about stitching this, baste this first. I almost always baste sleeves like this, because if you get a little fold or a crinkle when you're stitching, you only take out this much basting and you can just fix it, right? If you've stitched it and serged it and then you look at it and it's like, oh man, you don't want to be taking that stuff out. Nobody wants to take out serging. That's just wrong. So I'm going to finish putting this sleeve and the other sleeve in, and I'm going to baste them, and we'll come back and take a look at them and see if there are any crinkles and how to fix them. Hopefully there won't be any, fingers crossed, but yeah, let's see how the sleeves go in. All right, I basted in my sleeves. I brought my seam ripper because I suspect I might need it. I haven't looked at them yet, so I'm going to look at them together. The cap on this is kind of high. It went in really well, but I think that there might be a couple of little glitches that I have to fix. And yeah, so I basted it in, and we're gonna see. So before we stitch it or do anything, we want to go and look at it bit by bit. See, there's a little nubby there. This is a problem. You can see right here that I need to undo that and do a better job with that one. And then there's a couple of little puckers here, which I don't want. Some of them will iron out, but I think I need to just go back and stitch this one. The sleeve cap is pretty high. Same thing with this one. This one looks pretty good. There's a little niche there. So before I take out the stitches to ease it, I'm gonna go back and fix these little boo-boos. But yeah, looks pretty nice, huh? I kind of like the length of the sleeves. They go just a little bit longer than where the waistline is, so I think that will look really well. But you can see now why we basted the pieces together, because it's a lot putting in a sleeve and having all of that extra fabric. So now's a good time to try it on before you stitch in the sleeves. So I'm gonna fix the little boo-boos, I'm gonna try it on, and then I'm going to stitch my sleeves and take out all of these little excess basting stitches that I used to stitch them in. And then we're ready to start adding the skirts. So that goes up pretty fast from here. We have the second tier, which is just 2 pieces, and then the zipper, and then the bottom tier, and we're done, because this is all finished, right? The sleeves are already finished, the neck edge is all finished, so we've been doing the finishing work as we go along. So that works out really well. All right, so let's get this finished and on to the bottom. Our top is finished, our sleeves are in, they look gorgeous. I tried it on, I really like the length of the sleeves and it fits really well. So we're in good shape. Now, when you press your sleeves, you want to press the seam allowance towards the sleeve cap, and that's what helps this stand up, right? It gives it a little extra oomph. So everything is pressed towards the sleeve cap. It's nice and neat. The sleeves are in, the top is done. Yay, that's exciting. So now we're going to work on the middle tier, and this is piece 6. There's these funny looking pieces that were cut on the fold. So we have piece 7 and piece 6. Piece 7 is the skirt back, and piece 6 is the skirt front. So I'm going to open up piece 7 and put it right side up, and I have my little pin in there, so I know that this is the right side up. And then I'm going to take piece 6 and this one is right side up, I'm going to line them up just like the picture. I know it looks a little strange, right? But this is what gives it that handkerchief effect. So we're on piece 18 if you're following along in the instructions, and you can see this is piece 6 and piece 7 is underneath, and we have them lined up with the little scoop here. And we're going to sew this side. So let me swing these around so they match the drawing, because that's always the easiest way to make sure you do it right if you match the drawing. So here is my drawing, and I have this piece here, which is going to be the opening where the zipper goes. Hard to believe. This is the waist, and then this is the seam that we're going to sew. Right, so we're going to sew this seam right here. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Pretty straightforward. All right, here's our skirt piece, and we've sewn this seam as per number 18. Now for 19, we're going to pin the skirt to the bodice, and we're going to match it all the way around. All right, so now we're going to sew the skirt, the first skirt, to the bodice. And if you open this up, we have right sides together here, you can see that this opening corresponds with the top opening of the zipper, where the zipper is, where we left that flap open. So that corresponds with that. And then this seam corresponds with the other side seam. So we're going to sew these right sides together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my bodice here. Now remember, you have a straight line, pretty much, and you're sewing a curve to it. It'll be a little bit of a challenge. So we're going to pin this all the way around. You can match up all the circles and notches, but honestly, it goes together pretty well. Match up this side seam and make sure that, because that you're going to see. So we want to take good care and make sure that that is matched up really, really well. And we're just going to go all the way around. And again, this is one of those things, I mean, it fits together really well, so I wouldn't worry about it. There's no gathering here. It's a one-to-one, and look at how easily that went together without any trouble at all. If you're at all a little nervous about it, just baste it. Keep the curved side down to the feed dog, so keep the skirt facing down to the feed dog, so if there is any easing that needs to happen, then that is where it will be. So keep the skirt down to the feed dogs, and that way if there's any easing that needs to happen, it will help you bring in any of the circle. But honestly, if you've cut it according to the pattern and you cut all the sizes correctly, then you can see I'm not having any trouble at all putting it together. It is just fitting together beautifully. My side seams match up, and look at that. Last pin, perfect. So I'm going to take that to the machine and stitch it. That's pretty simple. First skirt is on, and then we are going to head off and do our zipper. A little bit of a challenge, but not huge. We'll be able to get it done. Look at this, we have a dress. Albeit it's a little short at the moment, but we have a dress. This looks exciting. Zipper time. Okay, so this is an invisible zipper as opposed to a traditional zipper. Don't freak out. Once you have put in an invisible zipper, you will love them. So what makes them invisible is that the teeth are actually in the back instead of being in the front. That allows you to get your stitching up really, really close. So if you have a zipper that's like a great match like this is, it literally becomes invisible. And they're forgiving. If you put them in and you don't stitch close enough, you can actually go back and stitch them over again. So it's just a couple of little techniques. I use my regular zipper foot. That works perfectly fine. I do find that sometimes I have to go back and stitch it a second time. So perhaps if you used an invisible zipper foot, you wouldn't have to do that, but the regular zipper foot works perfectly. So one of the first things that you can do to make your life so much easier is to press these teeth open. So the teeth roll to the back, but we want to have them a little bit flat, so it makes it easier to get your needle in there. Now, it's plastic, so don't stand there with the iron on it. You just want to give it a little bit of a press so it flattens out. So I'm going to go do that now, and then I'll show you how to put one in. All right, I just rolled the iron along the teeth. I mean, they're still rolling back. They're not going to stay flat, but now they've opened up a little and they're a little more relaxed. And I am going to zip it back up again to get started. And this is the side that we're going to put our zipper in. So I want to lay that right side up, because once again, we're always working with the right side of our garment, right? The right side of the zipper up. So this is the way I want the construction to all happen. So initially, I want to sew this zipper flange to this side of my dress. So I'm going to do, as I have this opening here, this zipper is going to go on this side. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to move it pretty much up into that opening and pin it, just so I know that it's in the right place. And then I can unzip it, and I'm going to sew this side as close to the teeth as possible. Right? I know it's a little weird, but think about it. You want it to end up looking like this, right? With this, and you don't have any, there's no top stitching on it, which is what's beautiful. So we need to sew it in a little bit of a weird fashion. On the invisible zipper casing, if you buy one in a casing, the instructions are on there and they're very good. So I'm going to go and stitch this, and when I get down to the bottom, I don't need to stitch it all the way down to this flange down here. I just need to stitch it till where I can stop. Going by this zipper head is going to be difficult, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to stop somewhere around here. You just need to be able to get into the dress. So I'm going to go sew this side now, and we'll be back. All right, now we have a couple of things going on here with the zipper, right? We want to get this sewn up to the top, right? Because this is going to cover up the top of our zipper. We can always go back and fiddle with this a little bit. And then we want to stitch as close as we can to these teeth without going into the teeth, because then you won't be able to zip it up and down. So I'm going to test this and zip it up. Make sure that I didn't cover any teeth. Any fabric in there. Perfect. So that zipper, that one side, has encased that raw edge, right? We have a little bit of a tail left over, and you can see I didn't sew it all the way down to the bottom. I stopped. That's fine. We're going to hand stitch this down afterwards, but that is a pretty nice looking zipper so far. All right. So now we're going to lay it back out again the way that it's supposed to be sewn together. Make sure that we are sewing the right pieces. So here's the zipper that I've sewn, and here is the other side of my garment. It's a little hard because there's a lot of fabric here. All right. We want to try to get it as flat as possible. This is important. So it's important that we can see now that this is laying flat. This is the right side of this garment. There's a couple of things we want to pay attention to. We want to make sure that this seam lines up perfectly with the zipper. That is critical, because you don't want to look at the side of it and have it be cattywampus, right? We also want to stop at exactly the same spot where we stopped for the last piece that we put in. That's important, because when we go to finish this seam, these need to be even. And again, it's one of those things you can go back and tweak, but aim for that. So in order to do that, we are going to pin the right side of this zipper. Once again, we're going to flip the zipper over because we want this to end up as a finished seam. So I'm going to flip this whole thing over so I know that I can line up my zipper. I particularly want to line up this side seam. So there's always a lot going on with a zipper, right? So we want to make sure that that zipper tape is going to line up with that side seam. If you don't think a pin is going to cut it, a couple of stitches work really, really well. So given that, we can unzip this now, because now our zipper is pinned in place at this juncture that is really critical for us. So then we can just pin it back up this way, and we know the tops will meet. We are confident that they will meet. And then we also want to know where the zipper is going to stop. So I'm going to realign this here, and I'm going to look to see where I stopped this zipper, and I'm going to just put a little pin in my seam in the general area, so I know I need to stop there. All right, so our zipper is lined up here at this critical juncture. We know it's going to start at the same spot, and we're going to aim to end it here. I'm going to take this to the machine and stitch it in, and you can see now we're getting this kind of a loop, right? It's a closed loop because we have this seam up here. This is what makes it a placket zipper, and then there'll be a seam down here, so it's in the middle. All right, so let's go stitch this side. Okay, let's see how we did with our placket zipper. So we have, orient you, here's our sleeve, here's the zipper bottom, and we're just gonna zip it up. All right, well, it zips up great, so that's good. And just tuck the little tails inside the piece up here. Let me give you a good shot at that. So this is the top piece. That looks great. I'm really happy with that. My little zipper tab just fell inside. So there's a little bit more of an opening that I want there. So I'm going to hand stitch that seam closed down just a smidge, and then I didn't get as close as I would like. So I'll go back and restitch those edges, which you can do without unpicking anything. You just stitch them a little closer to the teeth. I'm really happy with the way this came out. That lines up about as good as you're going to get it. And then down at the bottom, both of my pieces end in the same spot. So I'm happy with that. Now, finishing this, I'm going to go back and stitch those seams a little closer so it will truly be invisible. And then we're going to come back and finish this, and getting your machine back in there is almost impossible. So what we're going to do is just from where we finished to maybe an inch, hand stitch that. And then that way, when you go to finish off the seam, you can just put your regular foot back in and finish that seam off, and you're good to go. So I'm going to go make this zipper pretty and finish off this edge. And we're going to put the bottom skirt on. We are so close. We are almost done, and our dress, because the top is already completed, will be done as soon as we get the skirt and the hem done. Yay. Zipper, la la la. So I just stitched this a little bit up here and closed it up, and then I tacked the floating ends of the zipper tape. I just tack them down so they don't flop up, and I did the same thing on the bottom, wherever it is. Yep, I just stitched this closed and tacked these little tails down so they're not flopping all over the place. And I went back and tightened up the stitching on the zipper, and I think it looks great. Yeah, really happy with the zipper and the way it came out. So now, the final piece, we're going to set this aside as we construct our lower skirt, which has a lot of big pieces. All right, there we go. Set that aside, that looks fabulous. And we're going to start with piece 8. piece 8, that big, long piece. And there's 2 of them actually. And we're going to take the first one, and if you are following along, we are on step, let's see, where are we? All right, if you are following along, we are on step 8, and we are going to stitch, this is piece 8, and I have it right side up, and we're going to stitch the side edges of 9 to one side. So this is piece 9, I believe. This is piece 10. So this must be piece 9, which is a double folded lower front. I'm going to take the right side of piece 9 and we're going to sew this section, this length here. So we're going to pin this right sides together. Stitch this. Now it says double stitch. If if you don't have an overlocker or a serger, then you could put a second row of stitching in there if it made you uncomfortable. I don't know that it's 100% necessary, but the directions do call for that. So we're going to stitch this piece, so piece 8 and piece 9, and then we're also going to stitch piece 10 to the other side. All right. And then we're going to stitch piece 8. So we're making this huge circle. So I have piece 8 and piece 9. I'm going to sew piece 10 to this side. Piece 10 is the lower back. Right sides together. These little pins come in handy. Right sides together. So we're going to pin this section. I mean, these are really just great big rectangles that we're sewing together. And because the other skirt that we sewed on is a handkerchief hem, that's going to give us all of that really interesting detail when we sew this on. All right, so this is piece 10. So we have piece 9, piece 8, piece 10, and then I'm going to take the other piece 8, right sides together, and I'm going to attach one side to the extra edge of piece 8 or 10 or whatever one this is. Yes, 8 and 10 on this side. Right sides together. Just a couple pins. It's a lot of fabric. So you really want to consider your fabric choices carefully. This lightweight linen is perfect for this. And then we're going to sew the other side of piece 8 to what I believe is piece 9. And after we stitch all of these seams, we are going to have a great big circle, right? So this is piece 8, and it connects to piece 10, which connects to piece 8, which connects to piece 9, which comes all the way back to connects to piece 10. So we have, piece 8, sorry. So we have this great big circle. So we're going to sew this all together and then see how it attaches. I was thinking about this as I was sewing it, fortunately I didn't do that, but you want to make sure that you don't twist this, and you also want to make sure that you have all the right sides together. Now, there is a lot of this, right? We're going to start with piece 8, that big long piece 8, the center mark, that is going on a side seam. So we're going to start with that. Here is my bodice, right side up. I'm going to turn my skirt right side up because I want, as always, I want to start to make sure that I'm sewing the right sides together. This would be an awful seam to get wrong, right? Okay, so here's my skirt, right side up. So this is the side seam. Here we go. So I have this side seam on my middle piece and this hash mark in the middle of piece 8. Those two pieces line up. So I am going to flip this skirt over, this bottom tier skirt, and find that hash mark and line that up with my side seam. So that is step number 1. Then the next marker, as we go forward, is the point, and that is where my seam lines up. In the center of that point. So pivoting at corners is a challenge for anybody. I think that I would stitch it to the seam allowance point and then take it out and turn it and stitch it. Sort of like you would do for a bias binding corner. But that's my first mark. I'm going to pin this. I mean, we want those corners to lie flat, so we definitely need to clip them. So that's one section. Now I'm going to go merrily along this next section. After I pivot on this part here, you have a straight piece of fabric going into a square corner. And then this long stretch is going to take me to this next seam. And I'm just throwing a few pins in here. I'll go back and pin this later. And again, you want to make sure that it's not all twisted. Now I have reached the other side seam, and there's my center hash mark for piece 8. So, whoopee, that works. I'm happy with that. And then I should have another point and another seam to match up. Yes, look at that. I love it when a plan works. And then, boy, this next long stretch. And where's my skirt? I'm buried under the fabric. Okay, and that goes to the next seam. Wowie wow. This definitely could be a place where you might want to baste something. Oh, and we're back to the beginning. And we're back to our hash mark for our side seam. So on the points, there's a seam. On the uptakes, there isn't. So let's see. If I look at this, and keep in mind that it's only pinned in short places. There's a lot of fabric there. Woohoo! So yeah. So in the front, and this makes perfect sense to me, in the front there's no seam, right? Because the seams are off here on the side. So I think we're good. I'm going to pin this. I might baste it just to be sure that it's going to take me maybe an extra 10 minutes, but just to be sure that it looks right and it looks good when I put it on the dress form, and then that way I can take a good look at it and make sure that I'm happy with the way that it all falls. Then I'm going to stitch it, and then I will serge it, and then we are hemming and putting on our label. And then we're going to go party in our new dress. Wow, that was a lot. I want to talk about these corners because they really are what's making up the pickups, the faux pickups that are going to go on. So I stitched to the corner here. I stitched to the corner. I did back tack a little bit and then pivoted and stitched down. So whenever we came to some of those corners, and then the instructions say to clip off the corner. So I'm going to go around and do that, and then I tried it on. Oh my God, I love this dress. It is so cute. Now, the 3/4 sleeves, they come down just to below my elbow, were perfect for me because, like I said, I am short. and it was way too long. The girl on the photo for the pattern, she has it, if you look at the pattern here, it's just about lower calf. So for me, it landed on the floor. So I took it up 3 inches so I would get that same look. But yeah, I'm gonna finish it up. I'm gonna hem it. I'm gonna do a little double fold hem on the bottom because I have white thread in my overlocker and I don't want anybody to see that on the hem. And press it, and we're ready for pictures. I'm so excited. Hey, here we are with our finished Vogue 1312. Absolutely stunning. I am so happy with this beautiful dress. I had the hem, I shortened it 3 inches and then turned it over 1.5 inches and top stitched it. Pretty simple. It's just a big long strip, takes forever to get around, and then you want to add your label to the back, which of course we love. It comes with your Minerva fabric, and it looks great when you're hanging and you're going through your closet and you see all the Minerva tags. It's so great because you know you've made that and you know it fits really well and you put a lot of time and effort into it. This pattern, we learned a lot. We put in a placket zipper, we did set-in sleeves, we did a beautiful neckline, and we also did the faux pickups at the bottom. So that is a lot of fun. You get a real high-end look for just a little bit of work. And an advanced beginner or an intermediate can certainly tackle this designer pattern. It just takes some time. You just have to slow down and follow us step by step. But we take you through it in this Sewalong, so there's no reason not to be able to complete it. I made 3 simple adjustments. I took in about 3 inches in the front and 3 inches in the back around the neckline, and look at how beautifully that fits. And we did a gorgeous technique on finishing the facing on this and the lining, so it lays perfectly. So I'm really glad I did that. I shortened the sleeves because I am short and I want to wear this in the summer. It is linen, so I think the long sleeves was a little bit too much and I didn't want to go short sleeves. And then I shortened the hem 3 inches. And those are the only adjustments I made to the pattern. So that's not too bad. That's pretty simple. This pattern would be so cute in a sleeveless top with a solid for the top half and then the middle tier, like a really small ditzy Liberty of London print, and then for the bottom tier, like a big, huge floral. It would be perfect for a garden party. So I think I'll definitely be making that next. So I want to thank you for joining me on this Sewalong, and on behalf of the team at Minerva, please make sure that you post your makes. We definitely want to see this one up there. Hashtag Minerva Makes and hashtag Minerva Makers. So until next time, happy sewing. Bye.